hospital advertising for corridor care nurses to ease the NHS crisis. I know you've been talking about that.
It's unbelievable.
And one of the greatest questions of our time, are car headlights too bright?
Good question. I've got one for you. What is the favourite meal deal snack?
I go tuna and cucumber. No?
Snack.
Snack. Snack. Crisps?
No. Answer, boiled egg. Peter Cardwell is up now. Thank you very much for your company.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell here between now and 12:30. Thank you so much for your company. Lots to talk about this Sunday morning, including the former Labour minister who has been arrested in regard to alleged, well, there's lots of things he's accused of doing. We'll talk about that in a second. He's been arrested on suspicion of attempting to meet a young man, a child actually. Nigel Farage as well, meanwhile, has blasted the insulting Wes Streeting, he says, for attempting to stop us getting the truth on grooming gangs. Well, what is the truth on those rape and paedophile gangs? We'll actually talk to an independent counsellor in Oldham who is a Muslim who has been calling for this and says that a lot of people feel in his community are telling him that the Muslim community in general has been thrown under a bus. I wonder what you think about that. We'll have our decision desk. Johnny Gould and Reem Ibrahim are here for that. Lots to discuss with them, including the Labour MP rejecting calls for a local grooming inquiry that has identified more than 1,000 victims. Dominic Cummings, remember him, Boris Johnson's controversial chief of staff. He sacked me. Apparently he's advising Elon Musk in a plot to sabotage UK politics. We'll also talk about hospital advertising for corridor care nurses to ease the NHS crisis. These are nurses who work particularly and only in corridors. That is the crisis in the NHS. That is what we're dealing with there. And universities raising mental health budgets by up to 600%. We're also talking about whether car lights are too bright. That is the allegation, these LED lights, and apparently there's a black market in it as well. We'll talk about that. And Donald Trump, of course, in just a week's time, becoming the new leader of the free world. Let us know your thoughts on any of that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring. 0344 499 1000. Let's get started here on Talk. Well, you may have seen online that the former Labour Defence Minister Ivor Kaplan, he was MP for Hove from 1997 to 2005. He was arrested yesterday in Brighton. He reportedly denies any allegation against him. It's believed he was suspended from the Labour Party last year. It's said to have denied any wrongdoing. He was apparently, and there are no charges against him for him to deny, but certainly he has been very clear that he denies all allegations. Apparently about to meet a 15-year-old boy. He held two government posts during his time in office, an assistant government whip and junior defence minister, minister for veterans in the Ministry of Defence. A police spokesperson says, "We are aware of footage circulating on social media showing a man in Brighton being detained on suspicion of engaging in sexual communication with a child. Officers can confirm that a local 66-year-old man was arrested on Saturday the 11th of January, that's yesterday obviously, and currently remains in custody." Well, if there's any update on that, we'll of course bring it to you. No charges have been brought. They may never be brought against him, but certainly you may well have seen that video circulating online. And this whole issue, really, in regard to, obviously, Mr. Kaplan denies any wrongdoing, but the entire issue in regard to paedophilia, in regard to paedophile gangs, has been a massive one for about 10 or 11 days now. You want to talk about it, I want to talk about it, and I think there are lots of different angles to be explored here, because it's very, very interesting that Wes Streeting, for example, has said that this could cause violence against Muslims, for example. He said victims' voices have been completely marginalised. I think it's a disgrace if Kemi Badenoch isn't any doubt whatsoever about where irresponsible and coarse public discourse can lead on this issue. Look at the other side of the world. In Christchurch, New Zealand, says Mr. Streeting, where someone walked into a mosque and killed innocent Muslims, stone cold dead, with a gun whose magazine had inscribed on it for Rotherham. Now, I don't think, and I hope nothing like that ever happens here in the UK. I don't think it will. I don't think we're at that level of public anger. But there is anger, and there is sort of peaceful annoyance with this. Anger, thought that something must be done. And what I wanted to do this morning was go right back to the start, the very start of this, in regard to this current discussion. So I want to go back 11 days. I want to go back to Oldham. I want to talk to someone who has been instrumental in calling for this inquiry. And we know that originally it was a small group of councillors within Oldham Council. One of the independent councillors is a Muslim himself, actually, Abdul Wahid, and he joins me now. Abdul, thank you for joining me on Talk this morning. We've heard so much, of course, Abdul, about Elon Musk, about what he was doing. We remember that you and others were writing to Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister in the Home Office, to ask for an inquiry about Oldham. Can you just tell me, before we get into the detail of this, how the last 10 or 11 days has been for you? Because you know a lot about what has been going on, what's still going on, and at some risk to yourself, actually, have been putting these matters forward front and centre.
Good morning, Peter. Thank you, firstly, for having me on the show. And I think it's important, especially after the last 11 to 12 days, where we've had such attention drawn to Oldham. It comes with a little bit of relief and a little bit of anxiety because we've been fighting in Oldham for a number of years, especially since an assurance review of 2022, which was a 3-year review of cases between 2011 and 14. But it was deeply flawed in many people's opinions. The review excluded survivor testimonies and even attempted to silence a whistleblower. It failed to work with the people who were the victims of this abuse, ignoring their lived experiences This left many feeling that the process was not only a betrayal but also a cover-up. The manner in which it is being framed is not helpful, saying that it's a Pakistani Muslim problem, which isn't entirely true.
It's part of it, though. It is a problem with Pakistani Muslim gangs, is it not?
There is, I believe it's across races and religions. It's not. I think today the Times published some information which is quite useful, where it said that amongst the offences we know about in 2023, 83% were committed by white people, broadly in line with the general population.
That is absolutely factually accurate. There's no doubt about it that the majority of paedophilia offences are carried out by white men. But this particular problem that we're talking about, these gangs that operate and have operated in Rochdale, Rotherham, various places, Telford, parts of the north of England, it has been identified as a Pakistani Muslim problem. Some people in that community, not all people in that community, obviously, because you're part of that community and you're actually fighting against it. You're standing up for what's right, Abdul.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned before that, I felt fear from my stance and my position in calling for this inquiry. That's not actually accurate because what we do have in Oldham, we have across communities, we've got understanding that we want justice for these children that have suffered this abuse, and what all sides of the communities agree on is that the Labour administration of this town has really let us down. Firstly, they missed an opportunity with the assurance review. Why they only looked at 3 years when you look at these type of crimes that were committed in Telford, for example, the investigation was over 2 decades. And there's no justification for the assurance review of 22 to only be limiting the time period of 3 years.
Okay.
And there's systemic failings that, even that's been highlighted in that assurance review without giving too much detail. So it's the belief of everybody in Oldham that, something more comprehensive needs to happen.
And what does that comprehensive nature look like? Because, I mean, as you correctly say, the majority of paedophilic offences in this country happen are perpetrated by white men. That is factual. What's also factual is that the grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, whatever you want to call them, problem is most closely associated and perpetrated often by Pakistani Muslim men. Is there a cultural problem there, Abdul?
I don't believe that's 100% accurate. But that's
why is it not accurate, Abdul? Because the grooming gangs scandals, there's loads of evidence from Rochdale, Rotherham, the scandal there, for example, the vast majority of people who were arrested and convicted were Pakistani Muslim men.
In these particular cases, yes, but these aren't all.
No, and I'm not saying that's everything, and I'm not trying to racially profile anybody or say that this is, that there's any predilection or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that clearly the case has been a problem within the Pakistani Muslim community. I'm not saying every single person is there, but I wonder, is there, by any stretch of the imagination, but is there a cultural problem here? Is there an aspect of this that actually there is? Is it about British values? Is it about attitudes to women? What is driving this? What is it where people say it's okay to rape children?
It's not a cultural issue. It's not a race issue. It's not a religious issue. But that's the point. We need to investigate this thoroughly, rather than just passing by and the assurance review 2022 wasn't enough. And what the public in Oldham are seeking originally, what they wanted was a public inquiry led by the government, because the credibility of the Labour administration in this town is at an all-time low. Nobody trusts them to be able to carry out an inquiry or commission an inquiry and do it properly. So obviously Keir Starmer and the government have rejected that.
Well, what do you think happens now, Abdul?
Well, what Oldham is asking for is a Telford-style inquiry. So what the motion which was presented in Oldham Council in July 24 asked for was a public inquiry, and should that be rejected, then Oldham to seek advice from Telford in order to set up a similar type of investigation, which I believe Oldham Council are in contact with Telford at the moment. But what I fear is that Oldham Council is paralysed with fear of how they're going to handle this, especially because they have no credibility left in front of the residents of this town.
Okay.
And one really important factor in this is that it's very expensive to carry out these inquiries.
Yes.
And it's difficult to see how Oldham Council are going to actually pay for this, how they're going to fund this.
Yeah.
There's a financial crisis going on in Oldham where, we're on the verge of bankruptcy possibly if we're not careful. And so where are we going to find the funds to actually carry out this public inquiry? So that's where we need still help from the government to actually fund this.
Okay, thanks, Abdul. That's Councillor Abdul Wahid. He is an independent councillor in Oldham. We'll continue to talk about this. I want your views on it as well. 0344 499 1000. A little bit later on, we're going to talk about the cultural aspect of this with Momus Najmi. He's a writer and commentator, Muslim himself, from a Muslim background himself. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the Labour MP who rejected calls for a local grooming inquiry that had identified more than 1,000 victims. Clearly, there's a problem there. We're also asking the question this morning, what do corridor carers mean for the state of the NHS? This is the news that specific nurses who are there to work in corridors, one specifically in a hospital in London, has advertised for these nurses to work in a corridor specifically. What does that say? Why aren't there enough wards? Why can't we just work this out? Or actually, if there are going to be people in corridors, is this just a practical step to say there should be nurses there, they should be assigned there? What about having, for example, plug points and line in and those buzzers and so on for people? We're asking the question today as well to our panel, to our debate desk members, and Johnny Gould will be here in a second, as will Reem Ibrahim, about whether they believe, and indeed you believe, that headlights on cars are too bright. Steve has been in touch and says, morning people, Peter, LED headlights are too bright. There was a petition that had gone through but cancelled because of, I contacted the RSC last year regarding the problem. Sue says, yes, headlights are too bright. Another person says, some car headlights are dangerous. There should be a recall for cars that have the dazzling bright ones causing the problem. I can no longer drive at night. It's too dangerous. Well, believe it or not, there's actually a black market in this for people who get specifically very, very bright lights and sort of retrofit them to cars. It's an interesting one. So let us know what you think about any of those matters. We'll talk to our debate desk members next. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. 1000. Mick says, let's have honesty. They are converting drafty, dirty, packed corridors into wards. We are becoming worse than third world war zones, says Mick. Well, we're not becoming worse than third world war zones. A third world war zone is much worse than what is in the NHS. Let's keep a sense of perspective, Mick. But I know what you mean in terms of the fact that the NHS is not in a good state whatsoever. On the debate desk, Reem Abraham and Johnny Gould. On this particular issue, I mean, lots of people in touch. What do you make of it, Reem?
It's absolutely awful, and I think that these particularly personal stories portray just how bad the situation is with the National Health Service. In the last year before COVID in 2019, the UK had the second highest avoidable mortality rates in all of Western Europe. So we are not just bad by our own standards, but healthcare in this country is actually killing people. It means that people that could avoid mortality are not. I think we have to have those honest conversations, and to be fair to this government, they've been having those honest conversations much more significantly than I think any previous government has. I think majority of the time it's actually because it's politically possible, right? If Labour come in and say we're going to sell off parts of the NHS, we're going to reform the NHS, no one accuses them of privatisation.
Even though that's what it is.
Even though that is what it is. However, when the Conservatives even touch the National Health Service or try and reform it,
we kept being told it was going to be sold off to the United States. I wonder, in regard to exactly what you're saying, Reem, that's a good thing to have the conversation, but nonetheless, do we know what the problems are? I mean, Wes Streeting, talking to the Health Secretary, for England anyway, talking about saying, oh, we need to have a national conversation with the NHS. No, we don't. You know, waiting times, GPs appointments, waiting in corridors. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? It is.
It does seem obvious. However, I think that the conversation about what healthcare system we actually need does need to happen. And I think that the British public also need to wake up and sort of look in the mirror and see what the National Health Service is at the moment. It is a socialist healthcare system.
But we're never going to change from healthcare free at the point of use in this country.
I think we can. I think that actually, if we look at all other European countries, I think the Netherlands is a really good example of that. The government don't own any of the hospitals. They're all owned privately, and it's through competition and choice that people are able to choose where they get their healthcare from. I think those kind of competitive models of healthcare are much significantly better. But it's also doesn't mean that anybody goes without healthcare. It doesn't mean that if you're too poor and you can't afford healthcare provision that you don't get that. There is always going to be that safety net. And I actually think that we need to wake up and get rid of this socialist government-created monopoly that is the NHS.
Johnny, what do you think of the fact that we are advertising for nurses to specifically work in corridors?
It doesn't solve the wider problem. And again, a national conversation just kicks the can to the future. We're going to have these anecdotal stories about people dying on stretchers 36 hours into A&E. Basically, they are putting pressure, the surgeries, onto A&E, and it's creating this terrible problem. I've had problems in A&E, and the nurses are not capable of really dealing with the full plethora of problems. It depends on the on-duty doctor. There was one situation where I was involved, where the response was absolutely world class. It's a complete lottery. But chucking money at this and chucking money at nurses in corridors doesn't fix a huge problem. A national conversation when there are 300 questions to answer doesn't solve the problem.
And what does it say when you have, right, we're recruiting you specifically to work in a corridor, we're putting in extra PowerPoints, for example, for equipment, we're putting in, you know, oxygen lines and things like that in a corridor. You might say, well, look, if it was a big room or something that was just an A&E overspill, it wouldn't matter and people wouldn't bat an eyelid. But actually, when it comes to the corridor care that people are on, a nurses actually being recruited for that, what does that say, Johnny?
It says that they're not actually fixing the problem at the source. We need to do that. And in other countries, there is an insurance-based, non-socialist approach to universal health care. In some countries, there are competing insurance companies where you can make a choice. And indeed, if you want to be partially covered with private, you can have an extra pillow on top of your National Health Service as well. And, you know, those countries are smaller. Obviously, this is a problem of a country where we don't actually know the population exactly of the country that we're in, 65 million or so, maybe more. But I've got no confidence in this government to solve what is essentially a growing socialist problem. We need to grasp this huge set of questions. What are the questions? and how can we solve it, and how can we lower taxes?
I think you're absolutely right. And despite the fact that we're spending huge amounts of money on the NHS, we spend just below £200 billion a year on the NHS. We are expected to see the NHS budget increase over the next year to go above £200 billion in a single year. So the solution is not more money. Let's be very clear about this. The NHS is not underfunded. If anything, it's overfunded. What we actually need is a fundamental restructuring of the system. I think Johnny's absolutely right. We need a social health insurance model. We've seen them replicated across mainland Europe, and they have done excellent things when it comes to competitive. So it means that different providers are competing with each other. It means that you, as an individual, get to choose where you get your healthcare from. If you don't like one provider, you go somewhere else. Within the NHS, we don't have that choice.
Well, West Reading has just announced that you can have a choice of 5 different hospitals to have your care in, so there is some element of choice.
And I actually think that I think that West Streeting's reforms, and I won't say much good about this government, I think, when it comes to the economy, but on the NHS, it's the one good thing I think they actually have done. It's one step closer towards some competition and choice. What I would like to see is that hospitals be actually owned and catered to by the private sector, rather than it still being on the NHS. However, this is one good step.
Final word from Johnny on this?
I've noticed there's some anecdotal outsourcing going on already. In this tyranny, in this world of tyranny, if you've noticed how your workers' rights have declined rapidly over the last 10 years or so, it's because corporate and social care has outsourced almost everything. And even I'm being referred to private companies now because our doctors don't always know that they're referring you to a sort of private outsourced part. So the NHS is being outsourced, whether West Streeting has decided it or not.
So you might as well privatise the whole system in the first place.
Sue in Cambridge says the NHS should be depoliticised and privatised, funded by insurance. Elizabeth says corridor nursing care has been used in my local hospital in Craigavon as the norm since COVID time, so it's nothing new. Craigavon in Northern Ireland, in fact, that is the hospital I was born in, Craigavon Area Hospital, as the norm since COVID time, so it's nothing new. You're lucky if you can get in an ambulance if you need one. We also, this is quite a good one from Eddie. He says you could coin a new phrase of corridors. A number of people reacting as well to to Abdul, who we had on earlier on, the councillor from Oldham. Jackie says, well done, Peter, for having an Oldham councillor on who articulated the mistrust of the Labour councillor well by the residents. However, yet again, he was evasive when asked about why these men do this, which is part of the problem. We'll be talking about that more a little bit later on in the programme, so stay tuned for that. Robin Dorset says a good start to avoid any possible persecution of Muslims is for the decent, peace-loving and law-abiding Muslims to stand up to the extremist followers of Islam and say no, raping and killing of anyone, least of all children, is disgusting and unacceptable. And on car headlights, we will get to this with our debate desk members as well. Good morning, Peter. Yes, car headlights are so bright to a point of dangerous. I dread my Friday night travel to my son's football training with him. In the car, I'm blinded by these newer cars, especially the SUV cars, as they are higher up cars and their lights just shine right in your car and you're driving a few seconds blind. So that is something that is certainly causing people to get in touch with us, and thank you for that. We'll be back with Johnny and Reem in just a second. We're going to talk about a few of the problems that Keir Starmer is having. Johnny mentioned the Netherlands in a second ago, and that's certainly where Keir Starmer may be thinking about, because he has a problem with one tulip in particular.
the authorities to investigate. We have given more powers to those authorities to do independent investigations, and you know full well when it comes to Keir Starmer, he will listen to what the authorities say.
Mel Stride is the Shadow Chancellor. He also has spoken to Sky News this morning. Neither man had time to speak to us. We did ask them, but Mel Stride spoke to Sky News, and this is what he said on the Tulip Siddiq allegations.
What is not right is that the Prime Minister is not moving her out of that position and getting her to step down, because she is the anti-corruption minister. She has serious charges laid against her now, or serious accusations that around corruption, and it's going to be really impossible for her to do that job under current circumstances, so she should step down, and the Prime Minister needs to get a grip of that.
Let's keep all three of us out of court on this one and stay on the right side of the line, as I'm sure we all will, but Reem and Johnny here on the debate desk. Just a quick reaction to that, Johnny.
She'll go, and then they'll bring her back later, because that's what Labour governments do.
The tulip will rebloom.
Exactly,
also,
in season.
Also what Conservative governments have done. I mean, I think the first example that comes to mind is Priti Patel, who had to, forcibly had to resign as a result of her...
With a different Prime Minister, though.
With a different Prime Minister, but I'm just saying it's not just Labour government that do this. It's of course.
But I'm thinking Mandy keeps bouncing back.
Well, he's going to be the US ambassador. True. Despite having resigned twice, he's going to be the ambassador of the United States. The interesting thing as well, Louise Haigh, let's remember, the Transport Secretary, thrown under a bus by Keir Starmer, pun intentional. I mean, he dealt with her quite quickly, but there are allegations that Tulip Siddiq is being dealt with slightly differently, because they're BFFs, they're constituency neighbours and proper friends as well.
I think it makes sense for Starmer politically to want to keep his allies close, and of course within his own cabinet he's going to want people that are loyal to him, and if it's a fact that him and Tulip are actually very, very good friends and are much more loyal to one another and much closer, actually it makes sense that Starmer does keep somebody like that on side. I do, and again, like, we are trying to keep ourselves out of court here. However, it is really interesting. Of course, we don't know what the details of the story are. If it is the case that she is connected directly to corruption in Bangladesh, I think it does serve a huge amount of problems. It almost doesn't matter how true it actually is. What matters is how it looks. And it kind of feels as though there is an element of corruption coming from the government. Of course, we don't know how true any of this is. But when we add this to the Lord Ali scandal, and we add this to the various other issues that we've seen over the course of the last 6 months since the election, this just does not bode well, and it kind of just smells bad, doesn't it?
Just to reiterate, Tulip Siddiq says she's done nothing wrong, and she has referred herself to the Independent Standards Commissioner for Ministerial Interests. We will see what happens there. Right then, let's talk about another person who's no great fan of Keir Starmer, and that is Dominic Cummings. He is allegedly involved with Elon Musk in a plot to sabotage UK politics. He is apparently, according to the Mail on Sunday, helping orchestrate the Tesla billionaire's attacks on Keir Starmer, according to government sources. Labour would say this, wouldn't they?
They would, wouldn't they? I tell you something, though. Dominic Cummings has stepped up to the plate and said, you know what? In Britain, we haven't got enough right-wing parties. That's what he said.
Definitely need another one.
No, I'm going to set one up called the Startup Party. And
what happens if you get like 5 years in? It's not the start. It's like New Labour. You know, what should you call New Labour?
It's not really new 10 years
It's not new anymore. I had always thought it should have been called Labour Gold.
Labour Gold!
That's
or
right.
Labour 2.0.
That's right.
I think this is so interesting, and I've got to say I'm a big fan of Dominic Cummings. I think that he absolutely understands the fundamental problem with the state. However, he threw his toys out the pram when things didn't go his way. I think if he stuck by Boris Johnson and he actually stuck by the Conservative government over the last few years, things would have actually turned out a lot more different. I don't think much
option towards the end.
Well, indeed.
Peter Kyle is the Science Secretary. He spoke to Sky News this morning about Elon Musk and actually specifically about the monitoring of Elon Musk and those tweets. This is what Peter Kyle had to say.
My department does not monitor individuals, but it does monitor the internet itself for trends in misinformation and trends in harmful content. We have legislation which protects people. Illegal content on the internet must be taken down. None of the rights and protections and safety features that we have now baked into our online activity are up for negotiation.
Okay, well, he didn't quite address it head on, certainly when he was asked about it. But I mean, Reem, Johnny, actually, what do you make of the thought, the suggestion anyway? We'll probably never know whether it's true or not that Dominic Cummings is involved in all of this.
Well, I hope he is actually, because we need a progressive voice on the right. To contact with Elon Musk beyond Nigel Farage. Apparently everything's all right between the two of them now.
It's all been worked out.
It's all been calmed down. But apparently Dominic Cummings was busy on WhatsApp while he was in number 10 with Boris. He frequently WhatsApps his main man in Texas or wherever Elon's lair is these days. But, you know...
He is a little bit Bond villain.
He is, isn't he? I quite like it.
I'm looking forward to the polls in sort of 3.75 years' time. I'm using that kind of digital analysis because that's Dominic Cummings' way.
Of course.
And the polls will be Labour 19%, the Tories 18%, Reform 20%, Starter Party 20%, and everyone will have to come together and there will be a Conservative Unionist Reform and Starter Party coalition, a rainbow of the right, who will then finally beat Starmer as one-term, two-tier Starmer, and that's where we'll be.
I think that might be where we are. I really? Maybe.
I'm not sure.
I would really love to meet Dominic Cummings. I think he's such a star. I mean, the fact that...
I've met him numerous times, including when he sacked me.
Oh, he sacked you?
Yes.
When you were a special advisor?
Yes.
Oh, that's quite funny. Maybe he didn't think you were very good.
Wasn't funny at the time. No, he didn't, clearly, although I sometimes wear it as a badge of honour. Do you know what? I saw him at a wedding a few months later, and it was all fine. We had a lovely chat and everything. You know, politics, that's politics. That's what happens.
Very good. Well, I think that he fundamentally understands the problems with the state at the moment. The state is too big, it's too bureaucratic, we've got too many middle managers. I think he really understands that actually a free market is really the way forward when it comes to the economics.
He's an ideological brother of Musk, isn't he?
He is. You know. And actually, Musk once tweeted about Frederick Hayek, who is my favourite economist, and is this entire idea that the government is just too big, and I think he gets that. We've also got to remember we largely have Dominic Cummings to thank for Brexit. I mean, he is really...
It wouldn't have happened without him.
It wouldn't have happened without him.
No doubt about that.
He led the vote leave. He basically meant it, so it made it so that actually Brexiteers weren't just seen as Nigel Farage, who at the time was seen as on the radical side of the right, although now he definitely isn't. But without Dominic Cummings, we wouldn't have been able to win the EU referendum, and we would not be out of the EU.
He got Brexit done. He got Brexit done. There is no doubt about that, and I don't think it would have happened without him. Either the referendum or the actual implementation. Although many people say the implementation wasn't quite what they wanted. Thank you to everyone. There's quite a lot of praise for the two of you, actually. Alan says, fab show. Had to turn the colour down on my TV due to Johnny's shirt, says Alan in Mill Hill. So, yeah.
Cheers, Alan.
And Sharon says, good morning. I do think Reem Ibrahim is amazing. She tells it like it is. She's absolutely right. I think we need to get rid of the NHS and stop dishing out billions for it is just not going to work, says that's Sharon in Staffordshire there. And thank you to Amanda in London, who says, you can tell when the left are rattled. They are now taking aim at Nigel Farage and Reform UK. Interesting times, Amanda says. And actually, thank you to Sandy Tregent, who has been in touch on Twitter yesterday over the councillors who have resigned. As Sandy correctly said, and we did try to reflect it on the programme, but perhaps I didn't quite get it right yesterday. You don't get everything right in broadcasting, but certainly there's a lot to that story, certainly of those councillors who have resigned, about 12 councillors, and actually Zia Youssef, who is the chairman of Reform UK, did a very interesting Twitter thread on his view of what happened anyway, which I'd highly recommend reading, and Sandy brought that to my attention, so thank you to her for that, and I'm happy to hopefully sort of clear that up. Speaking of things that are clear, car headlights. Sean says, I do Uber Eats and just get deliveries in my car to earn extra money, inspired by your very own Kevin O'Sullivan. That's right, Kevin did that, that's right. When another driver looms up behind me with these lights, it's like something out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I think some of them are illegal as well, says Sean in Bicester. Sean, you're absolutely right, actually, because there are people, there's a sort of black market of people getting much brighter lights as well, also the new cars. We'll get into that with Reem and Johnny in just a second. We'll talk about those paedophile gangs as well, because we're going to talk about this throughout the programme, and also the NHS. Anything you want to talk about, give me a shout. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
You know, we're looking into the next financial year for the really painful parts of that. And already, you know, you look at the growth figures. The growth figures coming out now, we're bumping around 0.1%, 0.2%. They're being downgraded. Even the sort of slightly optimistic-looking figures from a few months ago are being reassessed and actually were bleaker than they looked. So, you know, I do think that, you know, if they manage to knock the country into a recession and other countries don't go into recession, you're looking at a serious political crisis as well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Bill in Romsey has sent this message, says, "Good morning, Peter. We don't have enough beds in hospitals. To stop the beds being blocked and the ambulances being held up, every county build a 300-bed overspill hospital for what is required. It can take patients who need care, then they can sort out a care package, take pressure off the hospitals." Clearly, this, as you say, is a massive issue. Graham says, regarding the recruitment of corridor nurses, it means two things: admissions of failure and an admission of defeat. Anne in Mid-Wales says, scrap the NHS, other alternatives are available. Make private healthcare and insurance tax deductible. Stop treating foreigners for free, no insurance, no entry. Remove the extra population who shouldn't be there. Is it 10 million? Is it 20 million? We don't know. There, public consultation in 4 points. Interesting one from Penny in Essex as well, who says, why on earth is Rachel Reeves cozying up to China? She's far too thick and will give all manner of private information to a country that hates the West. The inmates are running the asylum, says Penny in Essex. Well, actually, Labour, of course, bet the farm, really, on growth. They said they wanted 2.5% growth in the economy. They're not going to get it. Borrowing costs have gone up as well. There's many problems on the bond market. This was another aspect that Peter Kyle, the Science Secretary, was asked about on Sky. Let's see what he had to say, and then we'll ask our debate desk members, Johnny and Reem, about this.
The Chancellor has set that spending envelope. It is within the fiscal rules. Those fiscal rules are not going to change. They're not going to be broken. This country will be returned to the financial stability for which Britain is always known until the Conservatives came in and trashed our economy. You know, the government doesn't comment on the ins and outs and the ups and downs of...
I'm not asking you to comment.
I agree with Ed Conway, who is your economics editor and reporter, who said that what's happening in this country is very in line with what we're seeing in like-minded countries, in particular in the United States.
It's interesting, actually, Darren Jones as well, who is the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Rachel Reeves' deputy, said these bond market things, it's all what happens. Well, we've got an economist with us, and that is Reem Abraham on the debate desk along with Johnny Gould. Reem, should we be worried?
Absolutely. I mean, the OBR at the time of the budget predicted...
Office of Budgetary Responsibility.
Office of Budgetary Responsibility predicted that GDP growth would be about 2% in 2025. Now that's looking like that's a pretty optimistic estimate.
And still not 2.5%.
Yeah, it definitely won't be 2.5%. We're also sort of looking at the end of last year, and it's probably very likely that the economy actually shrank at the end of last year. We probably saw that happen. So I think what's really interesting about this in its entirety is Rachel Reeves is talking about wanting economic growth. She really did not leave herself a lot of fiscal headroom when it came to the budget at the end of last year. And actually, we're at a position now where 6 months after the election, the government might actually have to break their own fiscal rules.
And only 11 weeks after a budget as well. It's meant to be with a budget. I mean, having been in government, it's like you want to almost get away with it. You want to sort of say a couple of days later, OK, that's all fine, nothing to see here, move on. But here we are, weeks on, Rachel Reeves in China, talking about £600 million of investment from them, looking to China to try to get the investment, the growth that just isn't going to happen, apparently, within this economy, Johnny.
That's right. My instinct with this budget was they are loading taxation on top of regulation, and it's like a double whammy. You know, the government can't institute additional regulation and then increase taxation because people will divest. Where I was in this economy now has completely changed. I felt like I can't invest here in the way that I used to. I don't know how I'm going to invest in the future, but the factors here that they want to go for, which is growth based upon property and deregulation of house building, for example, is something I just don't believe.
I think it's absolutely
too difficult. It's too decentralised, isn't it? It's too difficult.
You can invest in me, Johnny. I'm a good investment. I said this to Rishi Sunak when I worked with him. It's like £1 million to you is not a lot of money. To me, it's a lot.
It's a big investment. That is true. I think the problem here
What's
is
your
actually
return?
0%.
0%. It's actually minus. It all goes down.
Minus £1 million.
Minus $1 million. I think the problem here, Peter, is actually that the government don't understand how you actually achieve economic growth. We saw with the national insurance contributions rises in the budget in October, the government increasing the cost for employing people. So effectively what they've done is they've said, OK, we're not going to tax working people, we're actually going to tax employers. But in reality, that money is of course going to come from working people. It means that there are going to be less job opportunities. It means that we're probably going to see lower wages, or indeed less wage increases, or in some instances actually some job losses. Okay. I think we have to be very clear about this. The way we achieve economic growth is not through more government, it's through less. It's through the government staying out of it and allowing the private sector to do its thing. The way we achieve economic growth is through deregulation and lower taxes. We need a more competitive economic system, and this government just doesn't seem to get it.
They're the opposite.
They are absolutely the opposite. Okay. They also want to intervene wholeheartedly, which I think is absolutely wrong.
Let's talk about gangs, paedophile gangs, rape gangs, whatever you want to call them. I don't particularly like the phrase grooming gangs personally, because they're not grooming people, they're raping, and they're doing even at least, if not more, horrendous things to young girls. And we've been talking about this for a number of days now, really since Elon Musk retweeted and made a number of very serious allegations against Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister. And a little bit earlier on in the programme, if you're watching, about 45 minutes ago, I spoke to Councillor Abdul Wahid. He's an independent councillor in Oldham, and in a few minutes' time I'm going to talk to someone else about the perhaps cultural problem here, actually. Momus Najmi is a writer and commentator, and interestingly, Nigel Farage today accusing Wes Streeting of covering up the truth of grooming gangs. That's in reaction to an interview that the Health Secretary did with The Guardian yesterday, and news about a Labour MP who rejected calls for a local grooming inquiry that identified more than 1,000 victims. We're about 11 or 12 days into this story. People are still really angry about this, Johnny.
Oh, it's awful, and this is not new news. It's rehashed, decade-old news.
But it's still happening.
This is
still happening.
Andrew Norfolk's story.
Yeah, in 2011 in the Times, when they first really properly wrote about it.
When they talk about Rotherham, they forgot to mention Oxford and Telford and Rochdale and other places.
Oldham,
I was with a family on New Year's Eve. They were put together on our table, and they said, we're from Blackburn. And I said, there are some terrible integration problems there, aren't they? And she said, yes, we grew up, me and my husband, in Blackburn. We have moved to an outlying village because it's 90% Pakistani and Bangladeshi now, and I want my infant boy to be away from being sold drugs. We have moved to a village to safeguard the upbringing of our child. How very sad is that? And said the only people left who are originally from Blackburn in those streets now are the elderly. So there are huge demographic problems that have been created beyond the actual rape allegations and
problem that's there.
The society has been fundamentally ruined and changed. Luton, parts of Birmingham, it's literally across the country. It is the Wild West, and no one seems to be solving those wider issues as well.
And a lawlessness and a lack of British values being perpetuated. I'm not saying for a second that simply because you're an immigrant you can't adopt British values. Of course you can. We've many immigrants who do that. We've many are totally law-abiding people, second, third generation. We've got one sitting in front of us here, Reem, and that it is still an issue. It is a massive issue, and it's a cultural issue within Islam as well. And where are their community leaders? That's what I want to know. I
was just about to say that, actually. I think that what's really important now, what's absolutely pertinent, is that those Islamic community leaders, those sheikhs, they come out and they actually condemn what's been happening in the strongest terms.
But they don't, do they? Why don't they?
They don't. I don't know. I mean, there have been a few that have, but not in the way they should be. And I think that there is an element of fear. I must say, I think a lot of those community leaders are afraid that their own community will reject them, that they are betraying their own community. I think there are a lot of worries that actually these kind of conversations, I think Wes Streeting has mentioned this, that it stirs up more hatred than there needs to be. I think that ultimately we've got to be honest about what's happened and the consequences of which I think are, I mean, I would be the first person on the street to protest this. I actually am of the view that if all of this had happened and, you know, the conversations on X, but also Elon Musk calling it out as well, if all of this had happened in the summer, there would have been riots. I actually think that because it happened in the winter...
So Wes Streeting is right?
I think Wes Streeting is correct to say that there will be, you know, consequences, and there probably will be an increase in Islamophobic hate crimes, etc. But I don't think that's. I think that's pretty irrelevant in this situation. Okay. We need to be absolutely honest about what's happening, and I cannot believe the government haven't accepted a national inquiry. We have to know what's happening.
We'll see what they do, and we'll be speaking to Momus Najmi, a writer and commentator, about this in a second. Loads of messages coming in about the NHS in particular. Brian says we keep spending more and more money on admin staff to manage the queues. We have more and more queues. So now we have more managers and admin staff than doctors, nurses, surgeons and beds. And Barry says when you visit a major hospital at weekends, the staff car parks are generally empty. The work schedule needs to be changed. This hysterical excuse of a right to family life at weekends does not wash, says Barry. Well, we will return to that, but in the last couple of minutes, I want to get an answer from Johnny and from Reem to the fundamental question: are car headlights too bright? Johnny?
Yes, they are. And of course, when you go over a speed hump, you get that massive flash as well. So, as usual, regulation is behind the free markets. Yes, we need to dip those new headlights.
Reem, when was the last time you were flashed?
Oh, God, Peter. I actually can't drive, to be fair.
Yeah. You can't drive?
I can't drive. I'm going to start driving lessons this year. It's my New Year's resolution.
And when you have a car, is it going to have reasonable headlights
or
not?
I hope so. I think that whoever sent this message in is absolutely right, and this is a really important issue.
It's in the Sunday Times today. There are people who are getting much brighter lights. There's a black market.
I think there's a bit of competition, isn't it? It's like, I've got brighter headlights than you. Look at me.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of...
How bright are your headlights, Johnny?
Well, they're Fiat and they're very 10s, not 20s. But do you remember in Belgium when you went on holiday, you used to have to put yellow headlight covers over your car? Yes.
Why is that? Okay.
Well, in the olden days, you used to be able to show yourself yellow. Very unpleasant colour, actually.
I love yellow. Yellow is my favourite
on headlights.
You like your Fiat. You're happy.
I like to flash a bit. As a courtesy.
I have someone as a courtesy, just keep everyone interested. I have a friend actually who had a terrible Fiat many years ago. It was very unreliable, and he called it the Fiat worse than death. There we are. Thanks everybody on this. Rupert in London says the big problem in built up areas is that there's so many speed humps, raised zebra crossings, etc. that vehicles coming towards you are constantly doing the equivalent of flashing a high beam with a super bright LEDs. And James says, I now use a pair of yellow tinted driving glasses because I find them so bright. That's James in Nebworth. Well, listen, thank you on the debate desk today, Johnny Gould and Reem Abraham. Of course, Johnny, a broadcaster, Reem, comms officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Johnny, of course, no stranger to this station, a presenter on the network. We'll talk to Momus Najmi in a second. Also, we'll talk about hospitals more. Stay with us here on Talk. Lots to discuss, what your views to in the next hour.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell here between now and 12:30. Always good to hear from you on all of the stories of the day. This is my programme, but it's your programme too. So give me a ring on 0344 499 1000 to get your point across, whether it's on the hospital story we're discussing this morning, the fact that there are nurses being recruited specifically for corridors to work there, and all sorts of things like plug points and lines and IV drips and so on being put into those hospitals. We're asking the question, what do corridor carers mean for the state of the NHS? Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk to Roy Lilly as well about that. He's a former NHS Trust Chair. Also, 9 in 10 disability benefit checks carried out remotely as civil servants work from home. How on earth can you do a benefit check of someone to see whether they're telling the truth about their benefits and the truth about their condition if you're working from home? Can't exactly do it on a Zoom. You need to go and see their circumstances, surely. Anyway, we'll get into that in a minute. And we'll talk to Momus Najmi, a writer and commentator, about the paedophile gangs scandal and what the community, the Muslim community specifically, because it is a problem, this part of paedophilia is specifically a problem with Pakistani Muslims. We know that. We'll talk to Momus Najmi in a second. He's a writer and commentator. Let me know all of your thoughts on all of this, including the question we're asking this morning about nurses and whether headlights are too bright. Lots of people have opinions on that. 0344 499 1000. Those car headlights, are they too bright? Plenty of people getting in touch on that. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does 3 things. You can send me a voice note via WhatsApp, you can send me a text message via WhatsApp, or you can give me a ring 0344 499 1000. Plenty to talk about between now and 12:30 here on Talk. Thank you to Hurd, who says it's blindingly obvious to everyone the NHS is badly managed, overstaffed with managers and pen pushers, incompetent, wasteful, and finally now woke. No more money. Tell the NHS trust managers what their targets are regarding patient care, plus money to be saved. Remove them if they don't comply, maybe even with criminal action if patients die due to their incompetence. I knew 2 NHS trust managers, a married couple at different trusts. I would not let them run a corner shop, says Hurd. Well, running corner shops is actually quite difficult. I wouldn't want to do that. Maybe in headlights as well. Paul says yellow headlights were required in France. My car had them when I lived there. It was always interesting to drive in the countryside at night. You had no idea what you were missing. And another person who says maybe instead of bright headlights, the roads and motorways could be lit by street lamps and high beams only for country roads. Classic blaming the solution of a problem of bright headlights to the people that caused it by making us all drive in total darkness. Well, there's lots to discuss on that. There's also lots to discuss on a story that we've been discussing here on this station really for the last sort of 10, 11, 12 days, and that was when Elon Musk talked about Oldham, about the fact that councillors in Oldham, we spoke to one of them a little bit earlier on, in fact exactly an hour ago, in regard to whether a local inquiry or even a national inquiry is needed into rape gangs, paedophile gangs, grooming gangs, whatever you want to call them. Well, Momus Najmi is a writer and commentator and has some interesting things to say about this. We have more politically that's happening on this. Nigel Farage is accused Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, of covering up the truth of grooming gangs, and details about a Labour MP who rejected calls for an inquiry that identified more than 1,000 victims. That was in Telford. Sean Davies, who now represents Telford in the House of Commons, was leader of Telford and Wrekin Council when he wrote to the Home Secretary and Prime Minister rejecting a call for an inquiry into child sexual abuse in the town. That's a letter seen by the Telegraph. Certainly there's a lot that has happened in recent years on all of this, and a spokesman for Sean Davies, we should say, said that to suggest Sean Davies attempted to obstruct a local inquiry is completely incorrect. The previous Conservative government rejected requests from Telford and Wrekin Council for a nationally led inquiry, which Sean had been pushing for at the time. Following these rejections, the council commissioned a locally led independent probe. Right then, let's talk to Momus, and thank you for joining me this morning, Momus. Momus Najmi, writer and commentator. Just looking back over the last 10 or 11 days at everything that's been said, this is very sadly not a new story, but new life has been breathed into it by Oldham Council and specifically by Elon Musk and the political rows that are going on. I just wonder whether we're missing the fundamental issue here.
I think so. We are, because the way that we're using the language as well around it, it's actually a 1400-year-old problem, and this is why we have to be precise with our language. So, it starts with the problem of Islam itself, but there are various other differences or various other problems over here as well when it comes to the Pakistani community. So it involves the cultural issues that they have, and then the indifference that they have to the people over here.
I want to get into all of that. Momus, just remind. I've spoken to you before, but just remind our viewers and listeners of the perspective you're coming from and your history.
Yeah, so I left the religion 18 years ago. Became an ex-Muslim at that time, but I'm kind of indifferent to Islam, so I don't really classify myself as an ex-Muslim. So
are you from a Pakistani origin yourself?
Yes, I've lived in Pakistan for 9 years, and my parents are from Pakistan, and I grew up in Middle East, so I have like different perspective of different Islamic countries.
Of course. Well, tell us that perspective now. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's right. So, I mean, in Kuwait, where I was born and raised, you wouldn't find this mentality, or you wouldn't find it as much, or it's very well hidden. But it is done to non-Muslims. So they would have like mates from Philippines and stuff like that come in, and those mates, when I was growing up, used to find that themselves being thrown out of the balconies, or they fell out of the balconies and stuff after being raped by the people who got them over there, right? So this is a very common issue that happens to people who are non-Muslims in Islamic countries, where people who have the ability to do it, they will do it, and the people who do not have the ability to do it will not do it. And people who do not follow the religion properly won't do it as well. In Pakistan itself, there is a lot of cases, a lot of reported cases of sexual assaults and sexual violence against women. So that happens within Pakistan, and predominantly within the villages and rural areas where we're getting these Pakistanis from. So we're not really getting the cream of the crop when it comes to the Pakistani immigration. We're getting them from places that already have these issues. And they're not just issues that happen like randomly. There's a random guy who does it or whatnot. It is a cultural thing that is culturally accepted for them to do these things. So, and
why is it culturally accepted? How on earth could the rape of a child be culturally acceptable to any culture?
Well, I wouldn't say like it's culturally acceptable as such, but when it comes to non-Muslims, anything goes, right? So, because it was done by the Prophet themselves, I wouldn't say like raped or anything, but well, he did have sex slaves, right? So if the Prophet had sex slaves, I imagine the sex slave would not be willingly, wanting to have sex, especially when you've killed their brothers and husbands, right? On the same day, as it has happened, reported in history, what the Prophet did. So it's a culture then, right? So it becomes like, oh, if the Prophet has done it, in a way, it's acceptable for other people to do it as well. And to non-Muslims. So if they see themselves constantly in war with the West, which most of these people do, because when it comes to Pakistanis, they still are like aggrieved about the fact that Britain ruled over India and destroyed their Mughal rule over India, right? So they still see themselves, these people, as they are at war with Britain.
Are you making, I worry about making sweeping generalizations, and this is clearly not all Pakistani Muslims. We're talking specifically. Of course, it's not all of them, and clearly there are many Pakistani Muslims in this country who are totally law-abiding people who uphold British values. I wonder, why is it specifically a problem with Pakistani Muslims themselves? Why not Muslims from other countries? It's not? Go ahead.
No, it's not. This is what I'm trying to get at. Like the language issue. Like if we call them grooming gangs, well, they're not really grooming gangs. Yep. If we call them pedophilia, they're not actually pedophilia ones. They're going for the most vulnerable people, right, and the most easiest targets for them.
They are pedophiles, though. It's right. Is it not factually correct to call them pedophile gangs?
Well, they would do it to any age, whichever one is vulnerable enough for them, right? So there is a element of pedophilia attached to it, but it's not driven by pedophilia. It's driven by other things as well, right? So, and
what leads you to that conclusion?
Because within Pakistan, such people would commit such crimes to any age of people, right? They're not.
So it's to do with the vulnerability.
Yeah, it's to do with vulnerability.
Is there not? I mean, Sorry, I don't quite know how to phrase this question, but is there an element? I don't even know how to express this point, but the age of consent, is that even a thought in people's minds when they're there?
Well,
or they just
the
think...
thing is, like, there is no age of consent when it comes to it, right? So, because the Prophet married a 6-year-old girl and then consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old, the age of consent for them is very different as it is to us, right? So, the modern Muslim who is more educated, not just himself educated or herself educated, but their families are educated, they would ignore those rulings or those sunnah of the Prophet. They would not follow those rulings of the Prophet. But overall, Sharia cannot say that you cannot marry someone younger, as the Prophet has already done it, right? So, but back to that point of, it's not just Pakistanis, it's just because we have the biggest population of Muslims that we have in England and in Britain is of Pakistani origin. So that's why it's more predominantly Pakistanis that are happening.
I understand.
In the north, there, I think so, there are Syrian gangs as well. In Finland, there are Syrian gangs that operate, and there's Algerians, there's Moroccans, there's Egyptians. Like, it's all the Muslims, especially who are from a non-educated culture or impoverished culture and stuff.
Where is the
exercising it?
I mean, you've talked about the teachings of the Quran, as you put it. You've talked about the example or the bad example in this particular instance, in this particular discussion of what Muhammad did. Tell me about those. Tell me about the cultural issues in regard to Muslims who are educated, who are people who understand British values, who understand what's right and wrong. Are there, I mean, I've just heard almost a deafening silence from so many parts of the Muslim community. I'd love to hear a load of imams coming out and saying, do you know what, this is a problem, we shouldn't tolerate it. Any non-consensual sex of in any way, never mind involving paedophilia, never mind involving children under the age of consent or children in general, is totally unacceptable. It shouldn't happen. It's completely antithetical to all our values. Where are those people?
So, like, now there's different elements to it, right? So now when it comes to imams, you have to see who is funding the mosques, right? If the mosques are not being funded by the community, but they are being funded by foreign powers, can those imams, even if they think it's not the right thing to do, which rarely they actually think it's the right thing to do, but if they don't think that it's the right thing to do, can they actually say it? Because actually saying that, they'll have to follow that up with, we are not at war with Britain, we are not at war with the West. Right, that's not what their funders at the back would be saying, like Qatar or Iran, or if they are funding them, right? And then it comes to the point of moderate Muslims. Now, the problem with moderate Muslims is they don't understand Islam properly themselves. They don't know their religion because they're not really following it. They just associate as a cultural Muslim, right? So they cannot really go against theological teachings, or they cannot define that. They cannot say this is completely wrong when there is examples of the Prophet doing it. And in Islam, you're supposed to do is good exercises, good practice to do whatever the Prophet has reported to have done, right? The other point as well is, which is the major point of this, is the difference between Dubai, let's say, like how Dubai is dealing with it, Saudi Arabia is dealing with it, compared to us, is that we are not applying our own laws for fear of being called a racist or being called Islamophobic or whatever the name that they can come up with. Dubai and Saudi Arabia don't do that. They apply their laws properly. So if we apply the laws properly, those moderate Muslims who actually don't know their religion properly and are usually bullied by Islamists and imams and stuff into just, keeping quiet, so they themselves don't get ostracized from their own communities or called out and stuff, they won't have to worry about it. We will have a stronger hand.
And the law will be applied equally to everybody, which is what should happen in the first place. A lot of people blame institutional aspects for the paedophile gang scandal. A lot of people say that this is to do with councils, it's to do with police turning a blind eye, it's to do with authorities, the racism point, the worry about being accused of racism. How much of it is that, do you think, in your estimation, how much do you think of it as that, and how much do you think it is of people, for cultural reasons, turning a blind eye?
I think so. That's a factor as well. So that's the thing. Like, there's no one single silver bullet of understanding what the problem is. This is why we need a thorough investigation of which were the nefarious actors within this, which were the people who just, didn't want it to be called a racist or something, and basically were incompetent in doing the job and protecting the community, right? So this is why we need a huge investigation into it, because there's elements within the Pakistani community within Britain who would have done it not because they agreed to it, but because they thought what the repercussions would be to them, right? So let's say if I'm a politician and I have, I'm a Pakistani politician, I have a huge extended family, as they usually do. One of the cousins is doing it, right? I have no idea. They come into a family gathering, they take pictures with me, right? As you usually do, like, oh, it's a wedding or something, they take pictures of what. Now those pictures are out there, right? So, and they worry like, oh, if these come out, my cousin has actually done it. If this come out, then it will affect my career.
Yeah.
So how do I bury that, right? So there's a lot of self-interest and stuff, but it also comes down to the fact that maybe the Pakistani community, majority of the Pakistani community, are indifferent to the native British population, as if they're not seeing them as their own. Because if they saw them as their own, and they saw that their daughters then, because if they associate themselves with British native population, that their daughters are getting raped, maybe they would be more active. It just shows to me that whether you are moderate or conservative Muslim, however you might be, they're just not seeing the British population as their own, because they haven't come out at all.
Can that change at all? Can there ever be a cultural change that says, actually, you're integrated, or is it too late? Actually, these are British values. These are things that are unacceptable. And similarly, that someone who doesn't look like you and someone who doesn't share your background necessarily is actually the same as you, because we're all human.
Well, I think so. This is the problem. Like, because we think everyone is human and everyone is equal, that means everyone just thinks the same, right? That's not really true. And for someone to assimilate into another culture, they have to make an active choice.
Yeah.
And if they're not making it, then the application of the law should be there. So the thing, like, another thing that even Ben Habib pointed out was that we have a treaty with Pakistan where we can send these criminals back to Pakistan and they will accept it. They can trigger that treaty. We are not doing it because we are not applying the law, right? So it's not a problem of the Pakistani government. It's not even the problem of the Pakistani people over here. It's the problem of us. We are not enforcing that this is the culture. There is a monoculture, which is overriding British culture, and apart from that you can have a secondary culture, but that culture has no nothing of additional will be given to them. No excuses and whatever will be given to them. You have to follow this culture. If you don't like it, then you can leave, right? And that would happen the same if you were in Pakistan. If you were in Pakistan and a bunch of white British people went over there and started their own cultural enclaves, they won't be allowed. They will be kicked out by the military, right? So we are allowing these things to happen. So that needs to stop first, and then we have to assert that this is the British culture. Then we can have assimilation of people, but it will only happen in very low percentages because it's rare for someone to completely detach themselves.
Momus, thank you very much. That's Momus Najmi there, who's a writer and commentator. Really interesting hearing his perspective there. Brian's been in touch and says, if this is not a subject for an inquiry, then what is? We should definitely have an inquiry with teeth while implementing the recommendations of Professor Alexis J. So thank you for that. Nick says, these rape gangs are just another example of failure to integrate, a failure of multiculturalism, and a failure of government, a failure of those with the power to stop it. This will continue whilst MPs are more interested in losing their seats rather than the welfare of children. What have we become? What indeed? Gary says every Muslim that practices Islam try to scaremonger. They say that we are putting them at risk from retaliation by blaming Muslims for raping children. This is not true. They control areas and act without fear. If they're frightened, then they would not target white indigenous people. I don't think it's every Muslim that practices Islam. I know plenty of Muslims that practice Islam that don't say those things, Gary. But there are some, as you correctly say, and we just need to be really careful not to label every single person in the same way. Dan in Kent says in the 1930s we had a branch of Christianity that wanted to destroy another religion, and Christianity destroyed it. Now we have a branch of Muslims that want to do exactly the same thing. Democratic Muslims need to step up. Tony says, actually there's loads and loads and loads about headlights as well. I'll read out some of those after the break, certainly, and we will discuss that. We'll also take your calls, texts and tweets, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Paul in Staffordshire, who says, I have a 2022 Golf Petrol. The headlights automatically dip, but other people don't seem to have this system. I know what you mean, Paul, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I like to have the control myself, I must say, when I'm driving my mother's car. Actually, I usually drive that when I'm home in Northern Ireland. I don't generally drive in England. Caroline says, good morning, Peter. What do you class as middle management in the NHS? I agree there are too many layers of management, which causes bad communication, but all departments need to be managed. And the NHS is certainly something that a number of people have got in touch about. And there really are quite a few issues this morning, including the fact that a nurse is being, or nurses are being recruited specifically to work in the corridor of a London hospital. Roy Lilly is the former NHS Trust Chair. Roy, tell us what you think of this. Is this just a sort of inevitable thing that happens because so many people are being treated in hospitals? Is this actually in corridors? Is this actually something that's a responsible move? What do you think?
It is. I mean, there's not much else they can do. I mean, it's been a thing for quite a time. In fact, I was just looking it up. On the 13th of November last year, Wes Streeting said that he was going to consign corridor care to history and sack managers. who allowed it to happen. So
yeah, that didn't last very long.
He's going to have a few sackings to do after this, I think. Look, I mean...
Are they letting it happen? He's talking about managers letting it happen. I mean, are they letting it happen, or do they have no option?
No, of course, it's nonsense, isn't it? I mean, how many times have you been kind enough to invite me to come and speak on your programme? And, I've spoken sort of blandly about the problem the NHS has with capacity. And now we're seeing what it means. When you run out of beds, what do you do? And the NHS has been running out of beds for a while. I mean, corridor care isn't new. And now they've been, I heard of one hospital where they've been converting offices into wards to try and find somewhere to put people. There is a risk, when you've got cables trailing and oxygen cylinders. So now they're actually plumbing in the oxygen into the corridors and increasing their number of electric sockets so you can put monitoring machines in. I mean, of course, it's a horrendous situation for the people who are involved. But what else can the NHS do? I mean, it's chock-a-block. It can't discharge people, because if you think the NHS is in a bad situation, you should see the mess that social care is in. It just cannot find the care packages to get people frail, often very frail people who've been in hospital for a while, home safely. The NHS cannot discharge people unless they think it's safe, because they have a statutory duty of care. So they are stuck. And the only solution to this, there is no solution to this now. The only solution is for people to realise the NHS is busting a gut and doing its best with what it's got. But the solution is it has to fix social care. And of course, what has happened? West Reading has announced some kind of investigation. Baroness Casey, who won't report fully until 2028. I mean, it's a nonsense. Everyone knows what needs to be done. The Dilnot report, which was in 2011 and successive governments have ignored, is a perfectly sensible solution about, we won't go into it now, but I mean, it is a sensible solution to try and get social care back onto a proper footing. This situation will not go away, and the government have to urgently act on fixing what is really a broken community care system and its interface with social care. We're now in what managers call the capacity paradox. It means that the more capacity you create, the quicker you will fill it up. The answer to this is to stop people coming into hospital in the first place. All of these hospital beds are occupied mostly now by frail elderly people who will all have been on a frailty index list for their GPs. They're supposed to be visited, to be kept out of hospital. Yeah. It's not being done because there isn't the money or the people to do it. We have to stop people getting sick in the first place, and that means we need to urgently reform community care. The highest users, the biggest users of NHS emergency services are two groups, the over 65s and the under 9s. Both of those, so one is families and one is elder care, both of those are in the purview of community care, health visitors, district nurses and social workers. And we have to stop people coming into hospital. Otherwise, we'll be hanging beds off the ceiling and putting in two-tier bunks. I mean, it's a ludicrous situation that we've got to wait till 2008 to fix it. The government have to wake up and they have to get on and do this.
Okay, Roy, it's a really interesting perspective you have there. I wonder, I suppose, a question that some people might raise is why don't they put the people ready to discharge in corridors rather than the people in A&E necessarily? Would that work? Would that be something that would work?
I mean, look, the NHS isn't stupid. It doesn't put, it's really vulnerable people in corridors. I mean,
and within that, actually, are there too many people going to A&E? Are there a lot of people in A&E that shouldn't be in A&E?
No, I mean, there are stories that, appear in the press of somebody goes into A&E with a broken nail.
Or constipation or something, yeah.
Yes, I mean, look, no, the A&Es aren't stupid. They triage people, hi, how can we help you? What's wrong with you today? I've got constipation, really. I sit over there. And these are the people that wait hours in. Yeah. If you elderly, frail, you come in. Most of these people will have an upper urinary tract infection, which they get giddy and what have you, because they've been home, they haven't drunk enough, they've been sat in the chair, they've been cold, miserable, nobody's visiting them properly. So a lot of them will come in with very similar things. And then they will also have what we call comorbidities. That means other things wrong with them. So it exacerbates comorbidities. So like diabetes, they will be unstable. So they have to have their diabetes stabilized. They'll also probably have chest problems, COPD as we call it, chesty problems, and they have to be stabilized, antibiotics, that kind of thing. So no, I mean, hospitals aren't stupid. I mean, if people are really vulnerable and they've got a real problem, they'll put them on the ward and they'll move people around the system. That's why the advertising for corridor nurses, as much as it's been going on for a while and it's not new in the NHS, it is interesting that they are looking to recruit experienced nurses who know what they're doing and they can work under their own steam. So, look, the NHS, I mean, I talk to people in the NHS regularly. They are busting a gut to try and get through a very unusual set of circumstances. We've got the remnants of COVID, we've got novavirus, which is a dreadful virus, and it's a real killer if you're frail. You've got influenza and RSV. I mean, these are all respiratory problems. People come in, they need access often to air to get their oxygen saturations up, because if your sats go down, none of your vital organs work properly, and that's when people get very ill.
Roy, thank you very much. That's Roy Lilly there, who's a former NHS Trust Chair. And let us know your thoughts on all of that, 0344 499 1000. We have quite a reaction to the interview I did just a few minutes ago with Momus Najmi, the writer and commentator. Brian says, your guest was great, as in Rome. We seem to think being more hardline is a retrograde step, but we should be prepared to take it to improve our homeland. Ian in New York says, hooray, hooray, hooray for Momus. Thank you for speaking the truth about Islamism. Let's now trot out that overused phrase, silence is violent, for some elements of Muslim society. And Dorothy says, your interview with Momus Najmi was most enlightening, a clear perspective into the minds of the perpetrators. I think the teaching of the Quran is not a Western value, in Dorothy's opinion. Great show, says Dorothy McKean. Thank you, Dorothy. Well, Saeed is in London, and I get the sense you perhaps don't agree with some of those sentiments, Saeed, from what I'm being told. What's your perspective on this? You're very welcome to the programme.
No, thank you. Look, I was just looking at the Rape Crisis website, and there's some very worrying statistics, right? 1 in 4 women have been raped or sexually assaulted since the age of 16. 1 in 6 children have been sexually abused. 1 in 18 men have been raped or sexually assaulted. So this is a deeply heinous crime, and that is something. That is something that should be addressed. And I think Momus and others do a great disservice to this discussion by focusing the blame on a very small subset of the offenders and the offences, and then extrapolating from there on issues about the problem is with Islam. This is what this is directly linked to what Prophet
Can I just
Muhammad
ask you, Saeed?
1400 years ago.
Okay, within that context of what you've just said, Saeed, can I just ask you, do you not think there is any element of a cultural problem here?
No, look, I do not think this is a cultural issue. I think these are vile criminals who did something, and they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Trying to label this as part of, they must have done this because this is their religion, I think is deeply disingenuous. Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein were Jews. They did not commit their crimes because they were Jews. They committed them because they were evil people who were taking advantage of a situation. And so asking Jews to apologize for the crimes of Epstein and Weinstein.
Well, I don't think anybody's asking Muslims in general to apologise for the acts of, but there are Pakistani Muslim gangs. Listen, Saeed, thank you for your perspective on this. I appreciate that, Saeed in London there. We'll continue talking about this, and we'll also talk about other less serious issues like the strength of headlights, which a lot of people have been in touch with us about. Stay with us here on Talk.
44 years ago.
Wow.
On a Vespa scooter that had 6-volt electrics. It might as well have had a candle inside the headset.
A hairdryer on wheels.
Well, here's the thing. Policemen aren't getting younger, but headlights are getting brighter.
Definitely.
Those incandescent lights that were around when I started driving are 1/10, not half, not a quarter, 1/10 of the brightness of modern LED headlights. Halogen lights, which we all switched to in the 90s. I've got a YouTube channel, big in the 90s. We test 90s cars every week. And it is noticeable how much less bright the lights are. But there is another issue. It's the kind of cars that we drive as well. Like I said, I've got a 90s channel. We drive 90s cars. Vectras, Mondeos, Fiestas, Passats, sedans, as the Americans would call them, saloons, as we would call them.
And
That's
we're
what we
really,
used to drive.
so many more people are driving those higher cars now, the sort of SUV ones. Is that part of it as well, with the eye level and so on?
Yeah. The most popular cars are crossovers. Cars that look like four-wheel drives but aren't, so you avoid all the weight and expense of four-wheel drive, which you don't really need. But as you've just pointed out, Peter, they're much higher up. I drive, since you ask, an MG. Not something made in a distant province of China that you couldn't find on a map if somebody put a gun at your head. Actual MG, made in Oxfordshire, England. A two-seater sports car. So the lights on these crossovers, which are so insanely bright, just shine direct. I have to slow right down if they're coming at me. But here's the thing. This has been going on, people complaining about it, since the 70s. I had a bit of a look online. There was a commission in the 70s set up by the government that concluded that headlights were too bright then. But what this is a symptom of something else, and it's selfishness. That's what it's all about. People driving these cars think, I don't give a tinker's cuss.
Is it selfish to want to see?
Where they're going.
Is it selfish to want to see?
Well, here's the problem. It's nothing. It's you want to see 100% for your safety. But the problem is you're creating a massive safety problem for yourself, because guess what? You've just blinded White Van Man coming in the opposite direction. And he's got 2 tons of stuff in pallets in the back of his van, and he can't see where he's going.
Steve,
so it's something that people think makes them safer, which actually makes their driving experience more dangerous.
Wow. What do you make of these people who are, according to various reports, including in the Sunday Times newspaper, that are actually going to the black market to get even brighter ones that are available from other countries in lots of different ways, to actually make their lights even brighter than what the manufacturer puts in? I mean, that to me is dangerous selfishness.
Yeah. Well, it's illegal as well, by the way. You will get busted. You won't get pulled over for it. I very much doubt that. But if you get pulled over for something else...
Yeah.
I got pulled over the other day because apparently the policeman said the reason he pulled me over was because the vehicle I was driving was registered in the next town to the one that I was in. And I thought...
What?
Mate, that's not really an excuse, is it? But they need an excuse
because it was registered in the next town. I mean, is he familiar with the concept of travel?
It was late at night, and he was going... When he said it, I thought... You have to have an excuse to pull us over, but of all the excuses I've heard in, I think I just mentioned, 44 years of driving, that's the worst one. However, he's got a job to do, and I was polite and whatever, and we all went on our ways. But if you fit LED lights to a car that's not meant to have them, then the reflector inside the headlight is designed to take a regular halogen bulb, not an LED one.
Yeah.
And all you'll do is just dissipate light everywhere, all over the shop. And you'll annoy the living what's it of everybody coming in the opposite direction. It also makes it dangerous for pedestrians when they're thinking, oh, is it safe to cross? I don't know, because Blackpool Illuminations is coming down the road towards me at 40 miles an hour, so I can't see if it's safe to cross the road.
Steve, do you want to hear a rubbish joke about someone being pulled over?
Go on, then.
OK, a priest is pulled over by the police and says, Father, have you been drinking alcohol? He says, no, I've just come for an event. I just had a glass of water. He says, well, you're driving erratically. We're going to have to breathalyze you, I'm afraid, Father. Priest gets out of the car, does the breathalyzer test, fails the breathalyzer test, and he says, Father, you said you only had a drink of water. You know, you failed the breathalyzer test. And the priest goes, he's done it again.
All right.
I love that joke.
Actually, that's quite good, because I thought it was going to be a proper Jim Davidson / Bobby Davro type.
No,
joke.
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid I can't reach those dizzy heights. Joe, I once actually interviewed, I think I may be the only person who's ever missed a call, speaking about entertainers from that era, I think I might be the only person who's once missed a call from Keith Chegwin because I was on the phone to Timmy Mallet. In fact, I was interviewing Keith Chegwin whilst he was driving his car, and he was telling me about his shows and what he did. He's like, yeah, it's all funny, you know, end of the pier, wiggly bum stuff. And then it was turn left in 300 yards. It was a very, very surreal phone call. But I fear we're off topic, Steve. But listen, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. That's Steve Berry, who is a former Top Gear presenter. Thank you to Brian, who says when headlights were replaced, they have to be aligned. That's never done. Headlights can rock out of alignment due to potholes and sleeping policemen. Also, high vehicles can be at the wrong height for smaller saloon drivers. Well, that's exactly what Steve was talking about there. Former Top Gear presenter Steve Berry. All this explains the problem. So lots of people getting in touch about that. We're going to talk next about 9 in 10 disability benefit checks have been carried out remotely as civil servants work from home. How on earth can you carry that out remotely? I suppose you could do some of it, but not all of it. We'll talk to Dr. Amu Raju, who is a disability ambassador. Stay with us for that next. And your calls and texts next here on Talk.
This inquiry has to come through. The big question mark is, why are they hiding?
Yes.
You know, everything. Why are they trying to dodge this bullet
and
in going on this
why
inquiry?
Have those that... So you've got the criminality, which is a given in terms of those people.
Yep.
Some have been prosecuted, not enough, of course.
Yep.
But the big issue now, of course, is those that have covered this up for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, exactly.
The council officers, the council leaders, the senior police officers, none of them have been brought to task whatsoever.
And you also know, here's another fact for you, that Jess Phillips, as the Safeguarding Minister, has never met any of the victims.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Ralph in Suffolk, who says, I regularly drive at night with all my mirrors turned away and I wear sunglasses. I know someone, my dad actually wears sunglasses no matter what the weather, because it can be quite bright. Maybe the Cardwell men always have quite sensitive eyes. Brendan says, regarding car headlights, there's nothing wrong with modern lights. I have an old car and a new car. My new car has bright LED lights. Even when I'm in the old car, people still flash to tell me to switch off my high beams when I've not even got my high beams on. People will always moan about anything new. John says LED bulbs, if not installed correctly, overload the wiring system in the car and can cause the car to catch fire. Lots of people getting in touch as well about the NHS regarding corridor nursing. Is it not a fire hazard blocking corridors with beds and machinery, says John in Blackpool. Very interesting point there. Anthony says Wigan Hospital has been treating people in corridors for a while now. Why do we not keep the Nightingale hospitals, says Anthony. And Carolyn's been in touch and says, morning Peter, why should we be thrown out of hospitals into care homes where we have to pay an extortionate amount each month and don't get the proper care as in hospital? Well, actually care in general and benefits that people have, this is a hot topic and we're going to continue talking about it now, because there's a story in the Telegraph today that says more than 9 in 10 disability benefit claims are being assessed remotely because civil servants are working from home, and there are worries about widespread fraud. Face-to-face assessments for disability benefits are at their lowest level since the pandemic. It's heightened concerns that various people could abuse the welfare system through a lack of proper checks. Around 4.2 million adults are expected to be claiming personal independence payment by 2030, up from 3.2 million currently. So this does affect a lot of people, and there are a lot of assessments going on. Dr. Amu Raju is with me now, Disability Ambassador. Dr. Amu Raju has no BA, it should be said, as well, for his work. Dr. Raju, I just wonder, I don't want to demonise disabled people. If there are people who deserve payments and welfare payments, that's absolutely fine. Absolutely no issue with that. Off they go, give them the money. As a taxpayer, I'm happy for that to happen. But if you have people assessing people and working from home, surely that increases the propensity for abuse of the system, and therefore, confidence in the system will go down as a result.
Good morning, Peter. Thanks for that insight there. The issue I've got here, let's put things into perspective a little bit. The DWP themselves released some data about 6 months ago where they said the number of fraud claims when it comes to PIP and disability is 0%. So that's quite an important figure to understand. I think where the concern could be around universal credit and the disability elements within there, that could be, and that's some of that could be around overpayments. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to the case around remote working, my issue is, I think disabled people are split down the middle to some extent when it comes to whether they are in favour of this or not. In that some people say, well, it's great that it's a bit more lighter touch, and that there's the process isn't so rigorous and onerous when it's necessarily doesn't need to be.
But I mean, I'm very happy with that happening. But what I suppose I'm not happy with is sorry to interrupt you, Amo, but we're in a situation where people are actually being assessed by people working from home. Is that something that you would support?
I would support it where needed, where, if the process is going to make it a lighter touch and it's common sense is applied, then fine. If somebody who's got Parkinson's and MS and those long-term conditions which are not going to improve over time, then a lighter touch process where remote working is the option is probably more sensible for them.
But how do you, I take your point, and one of my best friends has multiple sclerosis, and I take your point in that regard, because I know that illness sadly all too well. It's in my family as well. But if this is a new applicant, someone who is saying that they have some sort of disability or some reason why they I mean, in any conversation, we're having a conversation through video calls now, and I know if I was in the room with you, we would have a slightly better conversation. It's a great conversation. I'm enjoying it, and thank you for joining us this morning, Amo. But I know it would be a different conversation if you were in the room, and I worry about that being lost, especially when it comes to taxpayers' money being spent, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm sorry I did lose a bit of what you said there because the screen froze. But I think the issue is, look, taxpayer money needs to be reconciled appropriately. I think everybody would agree there. The issue is that the disabled people's movement, the disability charities nationally have been campaigning for a while for light touch. I think I might have lost you.
No, we still have you. Continue. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think they've been campaigning for a lighter touch in terms of the process, in terms of assessments, etc. But equally, there is a flip side to it, and I think the issue around new claimants, the process needs to be fair. We had this situation years ago, not too far ago, where people were being assessed and being refused benefits and winning 60% of the time at tribunals, which showed that there was the process for new applicants was almost when it was face to face was also unfair. So there needs to be a bit more work done to try and get a fair, balanced approach to assessing applicants, whether it's remotely or in person. But as I say, it's not something that you and I are going to solve for a few minutes on the show. But I think there's a lot more work and a lot more involvement needs to be placed, and the importance of conversations with disabled people and disabled people's organisations to try and get a smoother process, a more fairer process in place. That's what I would advocate.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That is Dr. Amo Raju, OBE, who is a disability ambassador. Thank you to him. Regarding an inquiry into the rape gangs, Brian has been in touch and says the reason why they don't want an inquiry is that they're frightened of the claims, just like thalidomide, Hillsborough infected blood, post office scandal. They want to kick it down the road. Lots of people getting in touch on the brightness of headlights. Leslie says those with bright headlights seem to be the same mentality as those with an exhaust as big as a drain pipe. Roy in Swindon says every car has a dial to lower your headlights, but nobody does. So why can't manufacturers set them lower, dipped as standard, says Roy in Swindon. Well, Roy, I've driven in Swindon. I've driven round the Magic Roundabout, and it is pretty scary, to be honest. If you're not familiar with the Magic Roundabout, there are 5 mini roundabouts around a bigger roundabout, and that, to me, is at least as hazardous as any headlights I've ever encountered. But I did get round it. I lived in Swindon for about 6 weeks and somehow managed to get round it unscathed, and a warm welcome was received. But yeah, plenty of roundabouts actually. In fact, my journey from central Swindon to the place I was staying, I think there's something like 17 roundabouts. They did love a roundabout in Swindon, it must be said. We're going to talk to Michael Martins in a minute. He's a former US Embassy political specialist in London. He now runs a consultancy called Overton Advisory. He's going to tell us what to expect from a Trump presidency, because the Middle East envoy is pushing for a Gaza ceasefire deal ahead of the inauguration. That is on Monday a week. Time is ticking on that. And the UK needs to work with Trump, of course. How can that happen? How can we get a sort of left-winger in Keir Starmer working with Donald Trump, who absolutely is not? Let us know your thoughts on all of this too. We'll take your calls, texts and tweets after the news as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Stay with us.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell with you for the next half an hour. There's lots to discuss. We've got plenty of people wanting to get in on the phones. 0344 499 1000. I'll get as many calls as I can in between now and the end of the programme. We're going to talk about America in a second because Donald Trump's Middle East envoy is pushing for a Gaza ceasefire deal even ahead of the US inauguration. Obviously, there are 8 days to go. It's Monday week. We'll bring you full coverage here on Talk of that. And also why there is method in Trump's thoughts, how the UK needs to deal with him. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the gang scandal, the paedophile gangs. That is something we've been talking about for a number of days on this programme. If you want to talk about it, you let me know. 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 7222 with the word Talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send me a voice note, a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Stay with us here on Talk. Lots of people getting in touch about roundabouts and indeed about extremely bright light. And Nevin in London says there's a magic roundabout in Hemel Hempstead as well. I was talking about the one in Swindon, which is 5 mini roundabouts around a big roundabout. Nevin also says you come from Craigavon, so it's a bit rich to hear you moaning about roundabouts. Craigavon is an area in Northern Ireland which has an awful lot of roundabouts. I do not come from Craigavon. I come from Rich Hill, which is in County Armagh, and that is categorically not in Craigavon. Craigavon is a few miles down the road, but I do not come from there. Anyway, let's talk about Donald Trump, who is obviously going to be the president again in 8 days' time, and he is a busy boy because there's an awful lot to do between now and then. His transition has been an interesting one, and actually at the moment his Middle East envoy has already met Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Steve Witkoff has held discussions which prompted Israel to deploy its director of the Mossad Foreign Intelligence Agency to Qatar for indirect negotiations with the terrorist group Hamas. They, of course, perpetrated the 7th of October massacre. And interestingly, there has been a thought to advance those talks. Certainly, this is a foreign affairs priority for Trump. Let's talk to Michael Martins, who's formerly of the US Embassy. He's a political specialist. He also runs a consultancy now called Overton Advisory. Michael, let's get your window on this. Tell us about your thoughts on what Donald Trump will do specifically with the Middle East, but also just more generally when it comes to foreign affairs.
Also, hello, Peter. How are you?
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Very well. Nice to see you. Hi.
I think what we're seeing with President Trump is he takes a much more vocal line on things that he cares about, and I think he's had a long-standing view on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I think he's lining himself up. You know, the inauguration, as you say, is in 8 days. He's been pretty clear that he wants the hostages, like the Israeli hostages, returned in order to even get to that stage of a ceasefire. Like he's more confrontational than President Biden, obviously, and he's also more pro-Israel. So we're seeing that come through.
Yeah, it's interesting because specifically in regard to Gaza, I mean, are you surprised in any way that there's involvement here from Steve Witkoff? Because it's rare in politics to know exactly what's going to happen. But of course, an inauguration is one of those times where you say, actually, next Monday, we know by hook or by crook, Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. So it does make sense, I suppose, for the Israelis to engage with this now, especially when they know there's someone who arguably is more in their corner than Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the engagement you're seeing is it's the run up to this. I think the Israeli government is trying to get on ahead of it, trying to get that engagement in before President Trump returns. President Trump obviously already had a first term, so he and his team have a lot of like those long-standing relationships in place. So I don't think it's particularly atypical. This is usually what happens with lame duck presidencies anyway. You have a lot more bilateral engagement ahead of Inauguration Day.
Interestingly, I suppose it's an interesting one in terms of what he's been talking about other countries as well, including the territory of Greenland, which I learned earlier today is apparently the world's largest island. Now, before people shout at me and say Australia is the world's largest island, apparently obviously it's 5 times the size of Greenland, but nonetheless Australia is considered a continent. I'm never really sure of Australasia versus Oceania versus I never really know. But anyway, the point is Greenland's really big. Greenland's really big, and Donald Trump is talking about Greenland and wanting to be more involved, if not buy Greenland. I mean, how seriously are you taking those thoughts from him? Because it's been something that's been there for a while, isn't it?
Yeah, this came up in his first term. I think when he talks about Greenland, obviously there's a huge strategic importance with Greenland. So it has one of the world's largest supplies of a lot of critical minerals, which are in everything that American military supplies tend to have. At the same time, it also sits along the Greenland, Iceland, UK corridor, which NATO members traditionally patrol because it's Russia's Navy's access to the Atlantic and therefore the eastern seaboard of the U.S. So I think and America, to be clear, also has military bases and troops stationed on Greenland at the moment. So I think what this is more of a pressure tactic. Denmark, which obviously oversees the autonomous territory of Greenland, doesn't pay 2% to NATO. I think this is directly linked to that. And as well, I think it's a negotiation tactic. I don't think he's personally, I don't think he's going to invade Greenland. I think, if anything, it's more about trying to pressure Denmark to pull its weight in NATO.
Trump has announced the new US ambassador to London, to the Court of St. James, to the United Kingdom. Yeah. I'm sure you're very disappointed it's not your former colleague Woody Johnson back for a second term. Tell us about the new ambassador, what they're likely to be like, what we can expect in terms of the special relationship, especially when Donald Trump has talked a lot about tariffs.
Yeah, I think, well, the ambassador and if Ambassador Johnson's watching, nice to see you, sir. But I think the incoming ambassador, he's going to have his plate full. As you rightly point out, President Trump has been talking a lot about tariffs. But when it comes to the UK, front and center of his mind usually is also the UK-US FTA. And I think for any incoming ambassador, that's going to be a primary position that he or she, in this case he obviously, will have to take in terms of engaging with the British government. I think in terms of maybe differences, that I'm less, we won't know until he gets here. But I do think any ambassador comes with their own personality, their own flair. Like Ambassador Johnson, for example, he loved going to I forget what they're called, like the little black cab booths where everybody goes and has like lunch, like the black cabbies in town. Like an Ambassador Barzan before him enjoyed much more of like the whiskey fueled parties because his partner was heir to I forget some sort of name of the whiskey
Kentucky,
in the US.
Kentucky
yeah,
bourbon.
Thank you. I forgot.
Bourbon, yeah.
Jack Daniels.
Jack Daniels. Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the new ambassador, he'll find.
I wish I'd married the heir to the Jack Daniels empire.
You and me both, Peter. It'd be a very different morning, probably.
It would be a very different morning. Probably a hungover one, Michael. Are you looking forward to the inauguration? What are your predictions? Because there were lots of rows about crowds the last time. Do you think that'll be an issue this time?
I don't think so. I think this time, I feel like President Trump's first electoral victory caught a lot of people by surprise. There was a lot of almost like resistance, maybe in some of the bigger, more mainstream American media outlets. I don't think that's the case this time. I think his win has been baked into a lot of voters. I think there's almost like permission to go and celebrate it. I think we're going to see larger crowds, and equally, even on the corporate side, like Boeing and Google and Meta and Amazon, they're all donating to the inauguration, which is different than previously. So my big question is like, will Kanye come? Because if Kanye comes to sing, like that would be exciting for me. I'm a Kanye fan, so I think that's my dark horse prediction.
What's your instinct? How likely it is? Do you think Kanye will come?
I mean, I guess professionally, I don't think it's likely. Personally, I dream.
Okay. Well, if he does come, I will say one thing to you afterwards, and that is this: "O ye of little faith."
Oh, well, maybe if this comes to Kanye and President Trump's attention, like, on this side of the pond, we're hoping it happens.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. That's Michael Martins, who's a former US Embassy official in London. He's a political specialist. He runs a consultancy now called Overton Advisory. Very good to hear from him on all of that. We'll bring you, of course, full coverage of Trump's inauguration here on Talk. You'll get all the best voices on this side of the Atlantic and, of course, in Washington and elsewhere. Lots to discuss there and lots to discuss here as well today. between now and the end of the programme, because we're going to discuss the grooming gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs, whatever you want to call them. And if you have something to add to that debate, or indeed anything else you want to talk about, was car headlights or whatever else, or America and Trump, let me know before the end of the programme. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
There's a reason why Mark Zuckerberg and other tech entrepreneurs are going in that direction.
Because they're scared of Trump.
No, because people are boycotting their websites when they think, no, I can't get access to all the full truth.
But
Zuckerberg's on board now.
Yeah,
But just cancel all those left-wing
fact checks. Only because Trump's in, and Trump...
Great. Social media fact checkers who are probably now all moving to North Korea because it's the sort of place they'll enjoy to live and they'll get work there. What they did, they didn't check facts. They said that anybody who said anything right-wing was lying.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Nevin, who got in touch about roundabouts. He's been in touch again. I said it was Nevin from London. He says, I don't come from London, I come from Cobham in Surrey. OK, fair enough. Very happy to clarify that. Listen, we've had a spirited discussion about quite a number of issues. Loads of people getting in touch about car headlights as well and whether they're too bright. We've talked about the NHS and the fact that nurses are now being recruited specifically for wards, not just wards actually, but corridors, specifically for corridors. We've talked, as we have over the last 10 or 11 days as well, about gangs, rape gangs, paedophile gangs. Some people call them grooming gangs. I prefer not to, because I think that's euphemising it. Jackie is in Oldham, and I know that we spoke at the very start of the programme to a councillor in Oldham. And Jackie, I know you have an interesting perspective on this. Thanks for your call on 0344 499 1000. What would you like to say?
I just wanted to add to the guest that you had on talking about Islam and why these crimes are perpetrated, and to give some insight, having lived next to a siloed Muslim community for decades, and spoken to Muslims and read a lot about Islam, I was fascinated about why cultures behave the way that they do. And what we've allowed in Britain is these siloed communities that are allowed to continue their practices and cultures as if they were in their native countries.
You're talking, I think, about what Momus Najmi said, the writer and commentator, just over an hour ago, and I was really concerned by a lot of what he was saying there. Maybe it's just my own naivete, I don't know. But Jackie, from where you are, from where you're sitting in Oldham, I mean, we're not saying for this at all that every single Pakistani Muslim doesn't have any British values. That's patently not true. But there are cases, certainly, and we've seen with these gangs, that it's not just about a lack of British values, it's a lack of any values. It's a lack of saying, actually, this is a child that is being sexually exploited, is being raped.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're looking, it is the patriarchal society. Boys, when they are young, are indoctrinated that they are Allah's chosen ones, that they are the head of the family, that women are basically, girls are told from a young age that you are there to serve the husband, you are there to please the husband. So there's an imbalance of how women and girls are perceived. And within these patriarchal societies, you have community leaders, you have imams, but there is a mixture. There is a conservative Muslim who are very strict about their ideology, but you have moderate Muslims who are silenced because of the societal...
And the thing is, you know, we want to hear from those moderate Muslims, but when they put their head above the parapet and say things like straightforward things such as this is wrong, they're often pilloried within their own communities. In fact, we heard from Councillor Abdul Wahid earlier on, independent councillor in not too far away from you, actually, who slightly expressed those sentiments.
Yeah, the moderate Muslims are silenced in these siloed communities. Muslims that come out of these communities and integrate and assimilate, their views are totally different to within these siloed communities. And if you've looked at cases of where child rape victims have gone to court, you have seen families that have attacked the victims and blamed the victims for their relative being incarcerated because their view is that they led their loved one to sin. So it is a total different mindset, and I think the only way we're going to tackle it in this country is that we need task forces that go into these siloed communities, that bypass imams and bypass the community
and surely it has to come, I just want to get Carol in before the end of the show, Jackie, but surely it comes, just briefly, it has to come from the community themselves as well and their leaders.
Well, we have to help as well.
Yeah, okay. Jackie, thank you so much. Great common sense spoken there. Thank you. Just before the end of the programme, let's talk to Carol in Cornwall. And Carol, I think you were ringing us to react to Momus Najmi as well in regard to what he said. What's your perspective on this?
Well, of course, Jackie has said a lot of the things that I would have said. So I agree with her, absolutely. She's hit the nail on the head, but so did your guest. And that's the second interview with an ex-Muslim that I have heard in the last 2 days. The previous one was with a woman, and she more or less said exactly the same things. Now, I think we have a much, much deeper problem. I don't think this is going to be easy to solve, because you cannot change people's mindsets. You really can't.
And if people aren't integrated now, you can't really go back and say, actually, you hold some values, or you are in a community where some things are tolerated that absolutely shouldn't be. It's hard to go back and retrofit that, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you see, what we haven't talked about and what I haven't heard on the radio is what has happened to the Sikh girls. You see, they have been targeted as well.
Well, Carol, we're going to continue to cover this story.
Yes,
and that's an angle we haven't done so far on my programmes. So maybe we can do that next weekend, actually. Maybe we can look into that particularly, Carol. So thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay, I really enjoyed chatting to you, Carol, even though it's all obviously about a very serious topic, and thank you for your thoughts. Thanks to everybody who's been in touch today, and thank you to the top team behind the glass as well. Chris Jacobs has been the producer of this programme, and Tommy Bateson, the assistant producer and chief tea maker as well. Titus D'Souza and Davis Fang have been the visual producers, and thank you very much indeed to them. Dean Shepherd and Ed Salem have been the technical operators, pressing all the buttons, making sure that we're kept on air and you can hear us. And Parag Birmingham, the video editor, the clip king himself today, and thank you very much indeed to him for all his work. Dean Spencer has been the weekend editor. This week I will be on, I'm off for a couple of days now, but I'll be back with Julia Hartley-Brewer on Wednesday at around about 12:30. You may know we take a look at Prime Minister's Questions. I watch it so you don't have to. I watch the whole thing, and particularly the exchanges between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer. That is what I watch. We get some clips for you, and we bring you really the highlights, if there are any, of Prime Minister's Questions, and have a little bit of a political chat with Julia. That is around 12:30-ish on Wednesday. I'm presenting Drive between 4 and 7 on Thursday and Friday, so I'll be doing that, and then back next weekend 10 till 12:30 on Saturday, and indeed on Sunday 10 till 1. So lots to do, very busy time. Big political week as well. Rachel Reeves is going to be back from China. She's under pressure. There are quite a few people in her own party not too happy with her. There are others, including Tulip Siddiq, under pressure. She denies any wrongdoing, of course. Big story on the front page of the Sunday Times today. Hand back to us any robbed homes given to minister, says the leader in Bangladesh. That is a story that is going to dominate politically this week. I'll be very interested to see when I'm back on air this time next week whether Tulip Siddiq is still the anti-corruption minister, whether indeed she is still in her post. Coming up this afternoon, you're going to hear plenty of action from the FA Cup. Up next is the Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur's trip to non-league Tamworth, and this afternoon you're also going to hear a clash of the Titans as Arsenal host Manchester United. That's live on talkSPORT from 3 o'clock. We'll have the fourth round draw as well.